On this edition of Primetime Politics, the city of Ottawa blocks off its downtown streets and implements an exclusion zone as bikers and their supporters roll into the capital for weekend rallies. I'll speak with Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson about what residents should expect and about the city's plans for the weekend. The blood donation ban for gay men comes to an end. Health Canada has approved a request from the Canadian Blood Services to screen all donors equally, regardless of sexual orientation. This Liberal MP explains why he thinks the change is affirming. And two members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery join us to look at the latest in the Conservative leadership race as the party reaches the deadline for candidates to pay up and make it to the final ballot. More than 500 motorcyclists are arriving in Ottawa over the weekend, and they're being greeted by a large police presence. Ottawa's interim police chief has warned that displays of swastikas and other symbols of hate during this weekend's demonstrations will result in charges. Speaking in Montreal today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said while Canadians have a right to express disagreements, it remains illegal to spread hateful messages.
I think it's extremely important in Canada to continually defend the freedom of speech, the freedom of peaceful assembly. It's a cornerstone of our democracy. Canadians need to be able to express their agreement or disagreement with governments, with policies, with perspectives out there, and that's something that we will always defend. It is not legal to incite violence or to propagate hateful messages. There are laws against that. And we trust the police to enforce the laws as necessary when it comes to this weekend, when it comes to any given day.
And joining me now for what the residents of Ottawa can expect to see this weekend is the Mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson. Thank you for being with us on Primetime Politics.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Mark.
So let's talk about what's happening this weekend with this Rolling Thunder rally. What are you expecting to see?
Well, we're expecting to see a lot of motorcycles. It will be loud. We're going to do our very best to control where they can and can't go. They're not going to be allowed anywhere near the parliamentary precinct. Certainly Wellington Street in front of Parliament Hill will be blocked off for all vehicles. They can walk up on the hill and have their rally and shout and scream all they want. But we'll also have our hate crimes unit monitoring what's going on. If we see examples of hate crimes being committed, those people will be charged. So we're not giving warnings or slaps on the wrist. This is the public of Ottawa are fed up with what happened during the convoy. We have to do a better job, and I feel much more confident that our city response and the police response to this convoy will be better. And you know, with these things, as you know, Mark, you can't count on something to go perfectly smooth, because you know there are people now coming from other parts of Ontario in cars and trucks, not just motorcycles. But the same rules will apply. If they want to get a $200 ticket and have their car impounded or their motorcycle impounded, they'll park in a no stopping zone. So we've circled the whole area of the hill. We've got more police officers out in residential neighborhoods because those people, quite frankly, many of them are still dealing with the aftermath of the horn honking 24 hours a day for 3.5 weeks during the truck convoy.
Yeah, and obviously there's been a lot more preparation this time around. And are you confident that there's a much better plan in place than last time around, when it seemed to catch everybody off guard? And there was a period where I think residents of Ottawa, and indeed people across the country, felt like the police and others were kind of on their back foot.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I think we're much better organized. I have much greater confidence that this plan that we put in place is going to work because we have the resources ahead of time. As you know, we worked very hard to try to get officers from the RCMP and the OPP. It took longer than we wanted to, and then we were able to move in with the truck convoy. And when we did, it was over basically Friday, Saturday, and wrapped up on Sunday. It was done very well. No injuries, serious injuries, no deaths. This time, just a few days ago, we swore in, I believe, 300 members of the RCMP as peace officers to give them the power to arrest and deal with local issues here. And we have a large contingent of OPP, RCMP, as well as other municipal police forces. I know I saw York Region Police Car downtown just this morning, as a matter of fact.
So are you seeing a higher level of cooperation from other levels of government well, this time around?
Yeah, I just got off the phone with the federal minister of public safety, and Marco and I had a good conversation. They've been very good partners. They're going to cover our costs of about $36.5 million that we incurred at the city of Ottawa for the truckers' convoy. And there's going to be another bill coming from this one because these people are here to protest. I think they're here to protest federal government policy, not the city of Ottawa. But that's one of the strange things about this protest. I can't figure out what they're fighting for. They want to take back the cenotaph. Well, the cenotaph was never taken from them. It's always been open and accessible. We put a fence around it because people were urinating and defecating and dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier. That kind of behavior is not acceptable. And I think, what happened in February, really the public were disgusted with some of the activities, putting posters around the Terry Fox statue, urinating at the cenotaph, dancing on the tomb of the unknown soldier, taking food away from a local soup kitchen in the Byward Market. And we're going to have a much greater police presence in and around those neighborhoods, in Centertown and Lowertown, Sandy Hill, Byward Market, so that people understand that if you start seeing 4 or 5 of these motorcycles revving up, they're going to be told to leave residential communities. And if they park illegally, and if it's a no stopping zone, we have the legal authority to impound the car. And that's a pretty expensive bill for someone who owns a motorcycle to get a couple $100 impound fee.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts about the future? And do you feel, and I know you've been around Ottawa for a long time and know that there were times when you could drive your car onto Parliament Hill where
That's right.
You could drive your car under the National Defence Headquarters. It feels like we're in a different chapter now in terms of the parliamentary precinct. Should we expect in the future that we're going to see these kinds of demonstrations? And do we need to be prepared for that to happen on a fairly frequent basis in the future?
I'm afraid that is going to be the case. In Toronto, I was watching a press conference with the chief of police in Toronto and indicated there are going to be 14 different rallies of various sorts, big ones, small ones, all over different parts of Toronto. These things are not only disruptive, they can be dangerous, and they're very expensive. And so we're going to have to be prepared. Obviously, as the nation's capital, we're used to protests. As you know, Mark, we probably have 700 or 800 protests, most of them relatively small. You don't hear a lot about them. They go up on the hill, they have some placards, and they leave. The big difference with the convoy, of course, they arrive, they block streets, they started putting up, temporary structures and hot tubs and everything else, and they just weren't going to leave. Well, the police have been told, loud and clear, by the chief, you see any kind of permanent or semi-permanent structure that they're building or hauling up a barbecue or a hot tub, they're going to be confiscated and taken away because we're not going to have that happen again for a second time. It turned it into sort of a carnival atmosphere. This convoy a few months ago, people in our community are still suffering the ramifications of being kept awake for 3.5 weeks with honking horns. And so we know that, a lot of motorcycles can be very, very loud. We've mapped out a route for them to take that will keep them away from Parliament Hill, and then they can do their loop and then go back onto the 417. And our desire is to see them leave on Sunday. All
right. Mayor Jim Watson, thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care. Have a good weekend.
On Thursday, Health Canada announced it was ending a policy that prevented sexually active gay and bisexual men from donating blood to Canadian Blood Services. This announcement comes nearly 7 years after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised to eliminate the ban during the 2015 election campaign. Health Canada had previously eased the rules from some members of the LGBTQ community. Prior to Thursday's announcement, gay and bisexual men were prevented from donating blood unless 3 months had passed since their last sexual contact. Rob Oliphant is a Liberal MP from Don Valley West who lost his partner to AIDS 30 years ago. He says this was a step forward in human rights and ending stigma against the LGBTQ community. He joins me now. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great to be with you, Mark.
So let's talk about why this took so long. Obviously, it's an important move. It's a significant move, but many people felt that this was a very strong example of discrimination for such a long time. So why did it take so long to lift the ban?
Well, I think I answer that in 3 ways. As a a politician. I understand that the bureaucracy moves slowly, cautiously, is very small c conservative by nature. And they had a strong and an important vested interest in Canadians having confidence in the blood system. I understand that. However, as a gay man, I also recognize that there was a degree of scapegoating, a degree of almost fear-mongering around the issue of HIV. And it was seen when I was young, certainly as a gay disease, which is not around the world. And it was seen as a disease which had a certain moral stigma attached to it. And I think either consciously or subconsciously, that affected decision makers over the last few decades. Even in these last 7 years since Prime Minister Trudeau made this commitment, it's been a push. And it's been a push by people like Randy Boissonnault, now Minister, Seamus O'Regan, myself, people from the NDP and the Conservatives, and activists across the country who have continued to push Canadian Blood Services to first make the request to Health Canada and then for Health Canada to respond to it. So I think it's a combination of appropriate caution and care and inappropriate stigmatization and prejudice.
That's a very interesting way to put it. So let's talk about what this means. The lifting of the ban applies only to monogamous gay men. So what does that mean for others? And is this fair?
Well, it's actually it's deeper than that, because what this does is it lifts a blanket ban on a type of person, a man who has sex with other men, bisexual or gay men, and instead it looks at behaviors. So it doesn't look at identity, orientation, or anything like that. Instead, it looks at what are the behaviors that could put that person at risk for having blood that is unacceptable to the Canadian Blood Services. And that happens. I mean, the reality is my mom was a lifelong blood donor. As she got older and took more medications and had certain conditions, it became less good for her and then finally unacceptable for her to give blood. So there have always been limitations on who can give blood. This was the only time there's been a limitation based on an orientation, a sexual orientation. So what this does now is it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, certain behaviors would put the blood system at risk. Now, do I think science is still a little behind on this? Yes, I do. I think that there is there are difficulties. We went through hepatitis and the tainted blood scandal in Canada. We understand that, but I still think that the Canadian blood industry is still somewhat conservative, and I will still keep pushing them on that. But right now, the good news is it's no longer a blanket ban on gay men. What it is, it's a ban on certain people who everybody will be asked the same questions, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of the way they have their relationships, but be about their behaviors. And I think that's good. It may surprise some straight people who have never been asked those questions. It'd be interesting to see what happens on that.
Do you think this will help end the stigma that people may have towards the LGBTQ community? And what does this mean for you? How do you look at this decision this week? How do you respond to it?
It's been one long march. I mean, it's over 53 years ago that the former Prime Minister Trudeau decriminalized homosexuality. And since then, it's been a long, slow, steady march. It's not done yet. But things like equal marriage rights change people's attitudes. If they can get married, maybe it's not all bad. And my church, I'm a United Church of Canada minister. In 1988, we started ordaining openly gay and lesbian ministers. That caused people to wake up. Now, not all faith communities are there. I'll still keep pushing on them. But I think generally society continues to move. And I actually think Canadian Blood Services is a little bit behind the people, say, in my riding in Don Valley West. I think they're way ahead of them. And, most Canadians have moved on this. They look at the there's not only a generosity or an acceptance, it is a generosity towards LGBTQ community, but we're not done yet. There's still comments, there's still those kinds of things. Anybody who's different, whether it's racial difference or ethnicity difference or linguistic difference, orientation, identity, gender differences, those are still cause for people to be discriminated against. We're not done yet. Yeah. Laws push, but the reality is people need to have their attitudes adjusted. Slow process.
All right. Rob Oliphant, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Joining me now to look at the week in politics, our parliamentary reporter Tonda MacCharles from the Toronto Star and Robert Fife, the Ottawa bureau chief for the Globe and Mail. Tonda, Bob, thank you for joining us on Primetime Politics.
You're welcome.
Hey, Mark.
Tonda, let's start with you. And as we know, there are groups that are holding marches and rallies in Ottawa this weekend. Freedom Fighters Canada marching on Parliament Hill, and the Rolling Thunder Bikers Convoy gathering near the National War Memorial on Saturday. All of this as the public inquiry into the government's use of the Emergencies Act during February's trucker convoy has gotten underway. So, Tonda, do you think the government has made its case for the use of the Emergencies Act?
Well, to be clear, the inquiry hasn't actually gotten underway, and that's the whole point of it, isn't it? To discover if, in fact, the government did make its case and was able to meet the threshold in the law, which is that other laws weren't available to deal with the situation. And that's the whole crux of what we're going to see Justice Paul Rouleau unfold. But he hasn't yet named, to my knowledge, a commission counsel and all of sort of set up the structure to get the hearings underway to find out if, what witnesses he'll call, to what extent, how much of it will be public. All of those are crucial questions. The government really just complied with the letter of the law at this point to hold the inquiry, to strike it. We'll see if they comply with the spirit of the law, which is to give transparency to why they needed it.
And Bob, what are your expectations around that? Is this going to be a full inquiry? Are we going to get to the heart of the decision the government made and whether it was appropriate?
Well, one would hope so, but this is not a government known for transparency. It has a well-established record of trying to keep information from the public. This was a prime minister, I should say, who came in promising to reform the Access to Information Act, and it was one of his first broken promises. So I think the jury should be out and wait and see how much information that the government will provide to Justice Rouleau. Look, he's a highly respected jurist, and I'm assuming that he will not take it very nicely if the government tries to withhold information from him.
Yeah, and Bob, do you think that, during the actual lead up to the invoking of the Emergencies Act, while there were people from various levels of government responding to the crisis in Ottawa, there was a lot of jurisdictional issues coming up, even finger pointing. Do you think we're going to see that during the inquiry? Is the government going to shift the focus to the public service and say, hey, it was kind of their call, or, that kind of thing?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the big problem seemed to be here in Ottawa with the police chief who was very reluctant to act and enforce the law. And once he was removed, the police were able to be very effective in almost within, as soon as they started, within 24 hours, the hill had been cleaned of these protesters and all these big trucks. And the big issue here is, we didn't need to bring in the Emergency Act to clear the protesters that were at the Ambassador Bridge. And I'm not sure that there is justification for the imposition of the Emergency Act. I think the police probably had the powers that they needed to do the job. They were simply unwilling to do it.
And Tonda, do you think that Justice Rouleau will get access to everything that he needs, documents, witnesses? You touched on this a little bit earlier, but do you think he'll have what he needs to complete the inquiry?
Well, we'll see. Look, there is in all of these inquiries protections for a whole bunch of things. And in a case like this, they've already signaled that cabinet confidentiality won't be waived. But that is actually something that they have in the past chosen to waive, given certain circumstances. Some cabinet confidentiality, for example, was waived around testimony around the SNC-Lavalin affair. Some cabinet confidentiality was waived around the pandemic and documents that were released, government documents that were released to Parliament. You know, in the end, is a paper dump conducive to finding answers? Well, look, if they get frank, good questioning and frank answers from ministers and other people who were involved in advising them, we'll see. But I have my doubts. I think that, like Bob said, this is really one to watch very carefully. The test is, did they have no other choice? Was this a last resort? Were there laws that could have helped them? And to Bob's point, the question around the police leadership in this city in particular, never mind how other blockades were dealt with, but in this city, that's a broader question than just one man. It's a question that goes into a whole bunch of things around city politics, police service board politics. That I'm not sure we'll see all of that explored in a federal inquiry narrowly targeted or focused on the use of the Emergencies Act.
Yeah, great points. And Bob, just a final quick thought on this. There are events playing out in Ottawa as we speak, of course, but I'm assuming that in the future, these kinds of protests are going to be handled a lot differently, and that there's already been a lot of effort that has gone into making sure that what happens this weekend and at future events will not be the same. And I'm guessing we probably even won't get to the brink of considering the Emergencies Act as part of future responses to similar events.
Well, look, once the Ottawa police chief solely was removed, the police moved very quickly in with a very good plan. I mean, honestly, in within 24 hours of moving, they had cleaned out the downtown core of Ottawa. And that is going to be, I think, probably a test case, a case study for all police forces on how to handle these kind of protests. I mean, there was no police violence. That was all done with remarkable restraint and very, very efficiently done. And it helped, at least in this city, to, bring back some respect for law and authority, and particularly the Ottawa police, because the people in this city had really just been up in arms about the fact that these protesters were allowed to have free reign of the downtown core of the city for 3 weeks.
Yeah. All right, let's turn to the Conservative leadership race. And Tonda, earlier this week, of course, former Reform Party leader Preston Manning warned the leadership candidates that personal attacks against each other could end up deepening divisions within the federal Conservative camp. Do you think that's relevant, Tonda? And is Preston Manning still, is he relevant enough for people to heed his words?
I'm not sure. There's a whole generation probably of Conservatives who don't remember him or remember him as sort of maybe a founding father of, a legacy party to the modern day party. But whether his words carry weight with a whole younger generation, I think, look, the cue gets taken from the top. And Pierre Poilievre and Jean Charest and Patrick Brown and all of those folks who are running do know who he is. And they would perhaps do well to heed his warning of the insult and the splits that could result from a very nasty leadership race, and the damage it could do going forward, and how it could be weaponized by their political opponents in a general election campaign and in the lead up to a campaign. Those are words of an elder that I think the leadership candidates themselves might choose to heed. But whether they can control their armies of supporters and what they do on social media and what they do in a campaign race, that's another question. But people take their cues from leaders, and if leaders want to step up, they might be wise to take that advice.
Yeah, Bob, what do you think about that? In the past, there have been divisive leadership campaigns, and people have worried, is this divided the party? Is this going to affect the next federal election? And sometimes it doesn't, it's forgotten by the time the federal election rolls around. But it feels like there's more at stake in this Conservative leadership race in terms of the future of the party.
Well, I mean, first of all, Preston Manning knows what he's talking about, because he destroyed the Progressive Conservative Party by splitting off the Reform Party. And it gave the Liberals basically a good 15 years in power. because of the actions that he did. We certainly have seen if you do not get strong leaders, parties can fall apart pretty quickly. We saw that in the period of time after Mr. Chrétien left office, and we saw it during Joe Clark's time when he was a weak leader, and Mr. Mulroney was able to cause a lot of divisions, and it tore the Conservative Party apart. And there is a real threat here that this same thing can happen to in this Conservative race right now between Mr. Poilievre particularly and Mr. Charest and Mr. Brown. I mean, there are things that are being said about all three of those things that are going to make it very, very difficult for the three men to let alone get together in the same room, but for their supporters. And you know, the idea of an election campaign is you need the party swinging in the right as a united force if you're going to win. And you know, it's not looking very good right now.
Tonda,
it's almost like I was just going to say it's almost like it's a scorched earth campaign already. You know, this at this early stage when so many of the preliminary sort of markers haven't been yet met to who's going to be on the final ballot before even a leadership debate has happened. So yeah, I agree with what Bob said. And I actually don't think that the losers will stick around. Among the front runners who are conducting the campaign in that nasty form right now, I don't think those losers will stick around. Whoever wins, Poilievre might be a question. He might see an opportunity to stick around. But you know, again, I think that it's a word to the wise what Preston Manning released to those candidates this week.
Bob, very quickly, just in the final 30 seconds here, Pierre Poilievre is getting the lion's share of the attention in this campaign, obviously. Does that mean he's winning? Is there room for somebody else to kind of get some attention and get some momentum in this race?
Well, look, he's getting very big crowds, and none of the other leaders are doing that. And one can assume that a lot of these people who are coming out to see him are also buying memberships. And on the basis of what at least I can see, it looks like he's certainly the front runner. But we'll have to determine how effective an organization Mr. Charest has, a ground game in terms of selling memberships, and the same thing for Mr. Brown. And we won't really have a better idea on that until much later on in the campaign.
Yeah, and the last two Conservative leadership races had surprise outcomes, I think it's fair to say. So we'll see.
Yeah.
All right, Tonda, Bob, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Bye.
And that's it for another edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Thank you for watching.